All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. My name is Paulo Campos. I am the 2021 and 2022 president of NOMA, Connecticut, and that stands for the National Organization of Minority Architects, Connecticut State Chapter. We are recently chartered by NOMA National, and like NOMA National, we have a very similar mission and vision, and that is really to kind of advocate for minority architects and their careers and really act as kind of champions for them and also to champion efforts to improve the justice, equity, diversity, and inclusiveness of our profession and our communities. The theory being a more diverse architectural profession does a better job of serving the architectural community at large and communities at large. So the NOMA Connecticut chapter is fairly new. We only got started in 2018 when Jose Hernandez, our past president, contacted Gina Calabro at AIA Connecticut and asked, why isn't there a NOMA chapter in our state? Since then, Gina connected a few of us, including myself, Omaris Vasquez, who is our vice president. And this thing has really taken off. We are now at roughly 60 members in our roster, and there's a lot of energy and enthusiasm for what we have planned for 2021. I really encourage you to look at our website, which is nomaconnecticut.org, and just check out what we're about. It says here, championing diversity, equity, and inclusion. That means through a whole series of initiatives, including things like this, which is about professional development and learning from professionals and experts in the field. It's about community activism. And again, this kind of panel touches on that as well, but also about mentorship, mentoring students who are aspiring architects, mentoring young architects who want to become firm leaders, and championing firm leaders who are open to creating a more just and inclusive profession. So we want involvement from everyone. This is not an organization just for minority architects. This is for everyone to get involved with. So please consider joining. Before I get to our panel, we'll talk a little bit about our sponsors and give a word of thanks to them. But before we get to that, just a reminder to please mute your microphones and turn off your video. Any questions that come up during the panel, please enter them into the chat box and we'll get to them at the end. I want to say thank you to several of the firms in our state that have generously agreed to be annual sponsors. That includes the SLAM Collaborative, Shepley Bullfinch, Quisenberry Arcari and Malik, and Picard Chilton. I also want to say a word of thanks to Patrick Wynn Architects, who is our broadcast sponsor, generously donated their Zoom account for today's webinar. And then also AIA Connecticut, who has been just a huge champion for this organization. Without their support, we would not be where we are. And to their credit, they are one of the more actively involved and actively supportive members of NOMA across the states. Other NOMA chapters do not have the benefit of strong support from their AIA component. So thank you to AIA Connecticut. So I want to introduce our moderator for today, Diana Deng. Diana has been called by some folks as the Inquisitor in Chief because of her natural curiosity, which I really admire. I'm someone that is always asking questions and always wants to learn. So Diana is a real estate developer, and she really focuses on residential, but also community revitalization and efforts to improve communities. She is very well educated, as you can see here. She's also very active. So I think she is a great person to have on this because she can speak to this from several different points of view. She serves on the board of the Connecticut Main Street Center and has also been a member of the Emerging Leaders Network. Diana, we're very happy to have you here and leading this discussion today. So I will turn it over to you and look forward to hearing what you guys have to say. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Paulo. So first of all, I would like to thank our panelists for joining us today. And as opposed to me introducing them, I think I would like to ask each of them to say a few words about themselves so we can hear directly from them, a little introduction. And then in addition to that, if each panelist could also tell us something that they're currently passionate about. And so I would like to start that off with Sarah Bronin.
Sure, and I don't know if you can see my video. I see Paolo. Hi, Paolo. But if not, I'll be a disembodied voice. I'm Sarah Bronin. I am a law professor at UConn, but I'm also a licensed architect. I earned my architecture degree from the University of Texas, and I focus there through the BARC program. I took historic preservation classes as well as, of course, planning and sustainability focus classes. And after that went to law school and graduate school, but still persevered and got my architecture license, which informs the kind of law that I talk about, as well as the volunteer work that I do in the community here in Hartford, where I live, and served as chair of the Planning and Zoning Commission for 7 years, and also now working on a project that I'm sure we're going to talk about statewide zoning reform. So that's me. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for coming, and I'm looking forward to the conversation. And yes, and I apologize if you hear kids in the background. Like some of you, I was unexpectedly gifted with an early release as the snow falls. So thank you for your patience in that regard.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Sarah. And then next, Dr. Mark Mitchell, if you could tell us about yourself and then tell us one thing that you're currently passionate about.
Certainly. I want to thank you for inviting me. My name is Mark Mitchell. I am a public health physician with preventive medicine. I focus on environmental health. I am an associate professor of climate change, energy, and environmental health equity at George Mason University in Virginia, although I work remotely from my home here in Hartford, Connecticut. I am the founder and senior policy advisor for the Connecticut Coalition for Environmental Justice. I was previously the director of the Hartford Health Department. I work and advocate on behalf of the National Medical Association, which is the Organization of African American Physicians. And so I have been involved with advocacy for several decades, both on the national, state, as well as local levels here in Hartford.
Okay, thank you so much. Has Representative Geraldo Reyes joined us yet? It doesn't look like.
I don't think so yet. I would suggest just to skip it. If I see him joining in, I would ask him to introduce himself.
Well, once he comes in, we'll take a pause and we can introduce him. But in the meantime, Sarah and Mark, I think we'd like to start with a broad level review on policy. Just if you could tell us broadly, in your experience, how you go about implementing reforms in the state, whether it be for policy and laws or zoning codes and regulations. And Sarah, if we could just start off with you.
Sure. So, as I mentioned in my brief introduction, I have worked at the local level, primarily here in the city of Hartford, and on zoning reform. And actually, Mark was involved in a couple of things that we did on an environmental front. We met early on when he was the chair of an environmental group here in Hartford. So looking at the city's zoning, any city's zoning regulations is a daunting task. They're very technical. They are often very outdated. And we had an opportunity here in Hartford to reform our zoning code. We did do a lot of community consultation. So part of the process of any time you try to reform something is wide consultation with a variety of stakeholders. We certainly did that in neighborhoods all across the community, bringing in environmental groups locally, but also statewide groups like named at the time Connecticut Fund for the Environment, but now called Save the Sound. We got their input, we got the input of the Connecticut Green Bank, and tried to really incorporate best practices on a variety of fronts: the environmental front, housing front, the economic development, really, best practices across the board. We also, in consulting with neighborhood groups, try to help them envision what kind of city they would want and try to put that into the zoning regulations. So I guess you could say I use my skills as an architect, but as a lawyer to kind of merge both of those and try to bring that together in a planning code, a zoning code here at the local level. Right now, I'm involved in efforts to reform statewide zoning rules, the enabling acts that enable local governments to zone, specifically in the area of housing. And that's a whole different process altogether.
That sounds really interesting, specifically about how towns will respond to the enabling acts, but we'll see as that unfolds in the future. Mark Mitchell, if you could speak to how, in your experience, you've gone about implementing reforms throughout the state.
Yes. Again, I've worked in nonprofits. I work with the I started the Connecticut Coalition for Environmental Justice. And in fact, we were very successful at getting policy passed, first in Hartford, then in New Haven, then statewide. And in order to do that, we were a grassroots organization, so we built up our community support for the first few years in each of the cities, in Hartford and New Haven, and then and also in Bridgeport. It took us a while to get established, and so we worked with community groups, educating people about the issues around environment and health, and how and environmental justice, and how communities of color bore the burden of more environmental hazards. There's a direct correlation between the percentage of people of color in a community and the number of environmental hazards in that community, as well as the health effects from those groups. So, so we, as a grassroots organization, I think our role is a bit different than it would be for groups like yours, although at the state level, it's probably very similar. But in both cases, what we need to do is to identify like-minded people who are interested in what you have to say and what your concerns are. And then on the state level, oftentimes there are already groups that are involved in the types of, in trying to get the types of changes that you might want to see to state laws. But it's particularly important on a state level to build coalitions of groups that can support specific pieces of legislation in order to do that. So I can give you examples. With the Connecticut Coalition for Environmental Justice, we got laws. We got on the local level, we were very concerned about zoning and zoning laws and ordinances, and so we would find out when which groups are responsible for what types of zoning that we wanted to see. We would meet with those groups, groups like Sarah, when she was with the zoning and zoning board of appeals, we go to City Hall, pull up, if we're concerned about a specific property, pull up the records and talk to city officials about the specific issues, but also when we're talking to them, find out what other groups, what other individuals are concerned about that issue so that we could touch base with them. And again, places like Bridgeport in the southern part of the state have very different zoning issues than than Hartford. In Bridgeport and Norwalk, and the zoning is not, they don't separate, for example, industrial zones from residential as much as they do in places like Hartford. Bridgeport has more progressive zoning, like Sarah has gotten in Hartford, around transit-oriented development and other things like that. But so on the city level, it's very much more grassroots, coming to public hearings in front of the zoning board and to the city council or board of aldermen. On the state level, it's more about building the coalitions and finding out who's already involved and making sure and trying to get what as architects, you have expertise that others don't have, that other community groups don't have, that other elected officials don't have. And they need that expertise in order to make decisions. And then also we as people of color have a different experience than many residents of Connecticut have. And so elected officials oftentimes don't know and don't hear about how the laws or policies actually affect communities, particularly those that are most vulnerable. And so it's important that we, as representatives of low-income communities, as representatives of communities of color, let them know how the current policies are affecting those who are most vulnerable, and what changes could possibly be made to improve the laws and regulations to make them more responsive to the conditions in our communities. I think I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you so much. So it looks like Representative Geraldo Reyes has just joined us. So if I could ask Representative Reyes, could you give us a few sentences about yourself and tell us something that you're currently passionate about?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon. So you'll have to forgive me. I am in Hartford and just joined the commute on my snowshoes. So I apologize for the interruption, and it took me a while to get on. But I, first of all, want to thank NHS for the opportunity to join on the panel. I am a lifelong resident of Waterbury, and kind of more or less kind of fell into the environmental justice lane, if you will, simply because I didn't like what I was seeing and how community was being treated. So as a first year legislator, I was able to get involved and pass the sewage bill Right to Know Act, which was in 2018. In 2019, we did some work on getting rid of plastics and trying to get rid of plastic, if you will, and reduce the volume of it, if you will. more importantly, in 2020, in a special session, I was able to address once again the put a little bit more teeth, if you will, into environmental justice law as it affects communities of color and those communities that are unfortunately disproportionately represented at the table. And so I've chosen the environmental justice and social justice lane to be the vehicle or the lane that I'm going to travel in as a legislator, because coming from the inner city, I was able to bring in a different view, a different perspective. I don't live in the country. I don't live in the rural or out in the suburbs. I live in the inner city, and I choose to live in the inner city. And I wanted my community to have, good quality air. Don't want the land to be contaminated and so forth. And having to be dealing with high asthma rates and just not the best conditions, with high traffic and air pollution from the buses and so forth and the trucks. So I am not an environmental justice engineer, but I know what I don't like, how it smells, how it tastes, how it looks. And more importantly, I was able to bring a voice and a community to a table that usually they don't get invited to, and or just didn't know they had an opportunity to be able to speak at these particular forums. And I've been very fortunate to be able to pass some legislation to help communities of color, and will continue to advocate for environmental justice for very same communities that are disproportionately suffer from high asthma, lead paint abuse, these type of situations that usually don't have a lot of people at the table, especially for communities of color. So again, thank you for the opportunity to join this panel, and looking forward to hearing some of my colleagues. And I'll just lastly say that have served the Black and Puerto Rican Caucus as vice chair the past 2 years. And as of last month, I was just recently named the chair of the Black and Puerto Rican Caucus. So it's an honor and privilege to me to be on this panel and to be serving communities of color to the best of my ability. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Representative Reyes. So you've all spoken to how policies have impacted your communities and why it is that you work on policy. And so we'd like to delve a little bit deeper into that now to get your specific perspective from each of your specialties regarding that. So if we could start off with Sarah, if you could talk to, how you work on form-based codes and how it's different from conventional zoning, and how form-based codes impact the equity and character of the community.
Great, thanks. And I, again, I don't know if you can see me. I just see Diana's name there. But welcome, Representative Reyes. It's so nice to see you. And I hope you're driving safely if you're driving. Don't look at me.
I am. Thank you.
It's nice to hear your voice. So, we talked a little bit about local zoning efforts before you joined the call, and, some of the stuff that we've done here in Hartford. And Diana, your question is about the kind of code that we did here, which is a form-based code. I know that Representative Reyes is very involved in historic preservation in his own community as well. And form-based codes are really good for Connecticut's big cities, small towns, even rural areas, because they help a property owner understand what kind of development they can build in a way that is compatible with the existing architecture and physical context of that neighborhood. Here in Hartford, we looked at all of the different neighborhoods, and maybe from an architect's lens to some extent, but looked at all of them and had a catalog of the kinds of buildings that we have here. How tall are they? How much of the street do they occupy? Where do they sit on the lot? Out of the street front do they occupy? Where do they sit on the lot? And really took a deep dive into all of that. And from that, we developed a context-sensitive zoning code that tells people how they can build something that's compatible with what's there. Now, it's not, you know, an architect's worst nightmare in that it doesn't completely constrain creativity, but it provides the general guidelines for development in neighborhoods. So what we're also trying to do is take the Hartford example and take the example of other communities around the state, like Canton, which is a suburb west or really a small town west of Hartford, Hamden, which has also developed a form-based code, Simsbury, which has a form-based code in a large area outside of the main downtown, as well as parts of the downtown of Simsbury's downtown, and take that idea and suggest through our statewide reform effort through Desegregate Connecticut that the state develop model form-based codes. Now, the equity reason for form-based codes is that they set out in advance what somebody can do with their property. And if you follow the rules, you should be able to get the zoning permit for that kind of development. When it comes to housing, probably many of us have been in meetings and public hearings where people object to the housing based on the person who is doing the application or the people who the new housing might bring. A form-based code allows a greater sense of certainty because it sets the ground rules and it does it in a contextual way. But it also takes out the implicit bias that sometimes we see exercising itself in zoning commission meetings. And so that's one of the values of a form-based code, and creating a model statewide is really a cost savings measure. The state has spent $2 million over the last few years on a program to try to help towns create what's called incentive housing zones through their zoning codes. And that $2 million has produced 28 housing units by some measures. So, you know, we're trying to say the state's already investing in zoning codes and revising those. Let's have a good robust statewide model that codes that cities can adopt. And by the way, you can steal all of Hartford's form-based codes and use that as the running start. So I'll just leave it with that.
Thank you. I have seen Hartford's new codes and they are phenomenal, Sarah. I do hope that more towns and cities across the state adopt them.
Thank you.
Next, Dr. Mitchell. So you touched on this earlier regarding environmental justice. And so I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on kind of the detrimental effects that you've seen from zoning regulations and state laws that have disparately impacted minority communities. And if you could, you know, even speak to specific zoning regulations and state laws and bring in the form-based codes that Sarah has mentioned, and potentially how form-based codes could help, you know, mitigate the negative impacts of, you know, environmental injustice.
Yes. So unfortunately, I'm not an architect, so I don't know much about form-based codes, but I can tell you about how low-income communities are affected by zoning, particularly from a health point of view. As I mentioned previously, some of the issues that we see in our communities is particularly in Bridgeport and in along the shores, are that people that, you know, that low-income people oftentimes can live next to industrial facilities that, and therefore can be exposed to not only the pollution from the air pollution, but also toxics and other releases in the soil. In addition, we're more likely to build residences and schools on old city dumps or on contaminated land from brownfields, old industrial facilities. I can give you a number of examples and a number of stories if we have time for that. But you know, but that's one of the ways that zoning affects the health and livelihoods of low-income people. Another is that, that they tend to put, obviously there's the whole issue with historical redlining. That is that, communities of color were forced to live in certain zones within the city, and the banks would not lend to people in those zones. And so there was a lot of disinvestment. And so the maps that show that zoning are the neighborhoods were outlined in red. So that's why they called it redlining. And so there's still a lot of in Connecticut, a lot of African Americans and Latinos were brought from the South or from the islands to work in the tobacco fields in Canton and the Connecticut Valley, Tobacco Valley is what it's called. Yet they were not allowed to live there. They could only live in Hartford or New Haven because of the zoning restrictions, as well as the inability to get mortgages and other things that other Americans had access to. So a lot of the same. So that's why we see the concentrated poverty that we do in our urban areas, and the high percentage of people of color. Also, there are zoning restrictions in the suburbs where you have to have an acre lot or a 5-acre lot, and then there are also a number of zoning restrictions about where there is no opportunity for multifamily dwellings, apartments. But so all of these things work together. Once you get the concentrated poverty, it's very, very hard for people to move out of the cities, particularly African Americans. Low-income whites have always been welcome in rural areas and in suburban areas, but it's you see very few African Americans in there. I have colleagues my age who were denied mortgages in the suburbs, and that's in addition to the steering, that when you are looking for a home, the realtors have oftentimes will steer people to certain neighborhoods in the certain cities, and I've experienced that myself. When I first moved to Hartford, they tried to get me to move to the North End, which is a predominantly African American section of Hartford. So there are a lot of policies, including zoning, that disadvantage low-income people, and of course that influences your schools and your opportunity for all of your life. So those are some of the issues with zoning and environmental exposure and health.
Okay, thank you for that, Dr. Mitchell. There are a multitude of policies and zoning issues that have detrimental impacts on minority communities. And so, Representative Reyes, in your position as a lawmaker, what do you have examples in your community of regulations that you would like to see changed, and how you go about changing them as a lawmaker? I think you need to unmute your your phone.
Yep. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much for the question and for the opportunity to continue to expand on my environmental justice journey. I'm just, the doctor's there speak, and it's almost as if he's telling my story. So urban renewal works when they want to clean out a zone, a barrio, or a district, when they want to put a highway through, like it happened to us when we were children on Lower Baldwin and Rivers. Renewal and model cities came in and said that we want to put you in a better situation. And basically what they did was put us in projects. And that's where I spent the formative years of my youth, was in the projects on North Elm Street. And most of us took the best that we could out of that opportunity, because it gave us an opportunity to interact with African Americans, which we did. I grew up in predominantly a Puerto Rican neighborhood up until I-84 came through our neighborhood, and then we moved to the North Elm Street project. So, you know, urban renewal works, and it works when the communities when they want your land, when they want your property, or where they want the neighborhood you grew up in. And I watched throughout the history of the city of Waterbury how it pretty much gutted the Puerto Rican community in the south end of Waterbury and put a highway through, and completely changed the urban layout of what that looked like for the Hispanic community. But I took the positive end of it, and I was able to interact with African Americans and go to school with African Americans, which wasn't the opportunity I was going to get if I stayed where I was. So I took it as a learning tool and interacted with a whole different culture, if you will. And I took the good part of it away. Other people didn't. And, you know, I still believe, this is my personal opinion, I still believe that redlining still exists. I still believe that there are cultural biases and cultural inherent racism in a lot of what we still have to work with when it comes to banking, when it comes to trying to get the neighborhood. There are still realtors that will not show you certain particular areas, regardless what the law says. And that is my own personal opinion. I had the opportunity to live anywhere I wanted to in any city, in any state. And I chose to stay in the neighborhood where I was raised. And all my sisters, with the exception of one, I have 7 sisters, all with the exception of one, all moved out of Waterbury. And all of them live in the suburbs in Thomaston, Watertown, Oakville, and Bethlehem. So they all moved into suburbs that maybe 30 years ago, 40 years ago, they wouldn't even be able to be in those towns. So when I start talking about cultural and biases, and when I start thinking about prejudice, I just attribute it right to my very own life experience and what I've gone through, what my sisters have gone through, and our own experience. My parents came here. My father came here to work. He's a construction worker and a carpenter. And there were many places that he would tell me that they wouldn't even rent to him because he had too many kids. And this was in the 70s. And, you know, we don't talk like that anymore. We use different terminology and different language. But I would imagine that a lot of the folks that are looking for multiple bedrooms today, and a lot of the folks, especially the undocumented population, that are really struggling to get the right size apartment for their families. Like I said, we don't use redlining, we don't use those terms anymore, but we still have, I believe, inherent biases and inherent discrimination. And what we could do, I am still fighting to, in particular, the south of Waterbury, where there are a cap on that of 17. but we now put a cap of 5. So other communities that are nearing that number 5 won't exceed that number 5. The south end of Waterbury has high asthma rates, poor air quality. We're not anywhere near as bad as the worst city in the state in the union, which is Springfield, Massachusetts. But Springfield, Massachusetts isn't that far removed from Hartford or the north end of the north part of the state, and then Hartford isn't that far removed from Waterbury, and the air doesn't know anything about where zip codes start and end. So I say simply that if the air quality and if Springfield, Mass is that heavily polluted, then so is most of Connecticut, because it's not that big a state. But I come from the avenue that I will continue to advocate and fight for improvements for all communities of color as it applies to environmental justice and discriminatory laws and regulations.
Okay, thank you, Representative Reyes, and I 100% agree with you that there still are, you know, whether they're labeled or not, there is still a lot of discrimination out there in terms of housing and getting people appraisals and having them move into certain communities. And so with an eye to the time, I know that Sarah Bronin has to leave us early at 3 o'clock, and there actually have been a couple of questions that have come through specifically about the form-based codes. So I was going to offer those questions up to Sarah now, so she has a chance to answer those before she leaves. So the first one, I don't know if you'll be able to answer both, but I'll ask you both of them. The first one was, do you know if form-based codes are better at preventing gentrification and displacing people to areas that Mark has been describing? And the other question was, do form-based codes address the affordable housing requirements that are included in the funding requirements used by developers? And if not, what can we do as designers to influence on raising those metrics?
Hi, yes. So I put in the chat a link to the page that talks about what we're asking for on form-based codes. And form-based codes are just one of many tools that communities have to try to take bias out of decision-making. So if you look at so right now across the state, lots of zoning decisions are left to the discretion, really, and in some cases, the whims of individual commissioners without any real standards to go on. And so one of the benefits of form-based codes is that they take that implicit bias against particular applicants or particular types of people who might enter into a community out at the back end, where you see that often occur. On the front end, where you get a lot of the input, is when you're drafting the codes themselves, the regulations. I don't want to get too stuck though on form-based codes. I mean, there's a lot on our website and there's a lot out there on that. I would love to just take a moment to talk more generally about the reasons why zoning is an issue and what we're trying to do about it. Both Mark and Dr. Mitchell and Representative Reyes have talked about their experiences with zoning, and it's something that we see intuitively. As a Mexican American person, I see it in lots of different ways here in Hartford and in our region. Just there is an implicit. There's a embedded in our zoning codes is the idea that certain people can't be members of certain communities. And I think you'll see in a zoning atlas that we're releasing tomorrow exactly how stark the differences are between cities and suburbs and really across the state. What you'll see is that there is a high concentration of one kind of housing in cities, and that's anything 4-family or above. Those are concentrated in cities, but generally speaking, only 2% of the land in our state is allowed for multifamily housing, for or more housing as of right. And does anybody want to guess how much land is zoned for single family housing? You don't have to put it in the chat, but I'll just tell you 90.6% of land is zoned for single family as of right versus 2% of land zoned for multifamily as of right. Now there's more of Connecticut that allows for 4+ family, but you have to go through that public hearing process. So the problem, again, with the public hearing process is it just presents a lot of uncertainty. So what we're trying to do is to look at ways to change the mindset about what different kinds of housing can bring to communities, trying to help people understand that there's lots of different possibilities and including some more types of housing and more types of people in your communities is not going to hurt your community. It's actually going to make it a lot stronger. That's one of the main educational missions of what we're doing. The other thing that we're trying to do, though, too, is to improve cities. And one of the things that our zoning atlas, which logs all the zoning districts in the state, found is that our state's restrictions on things like accessory dwelling units, which are small units of housing that are nestled into larger units of housing, that those are mostly restricted in cities. And the Waterburys and the New Havens and the Bridgeports of the world, they have more rules on accessory dwelling units than the suburbs do. So what does that mean? That means that Black and Latino homeowners cannot access the wealth that they have in their homes because they can't carve out a unit in their homes to rent out or to help them age in place or to earn them a little income to pay their mortgage. They can't do that. And where it's restricted most is in cities. So our zoning reforms are intended both to help open new possibilities for communities across the state, but also to improve the ability of Black and Latino homeowners who want to stay in cities to stay in cities. We also have some language in our proposals that addresses this issue of non-conforming uses. So things like scrap yards and used car lots and all of these other things that we see in our urban communities that are both environmental blights, but also property value reducers. So what we're suggesting in our legislation is that cities and towns be allowed to phase out those kinds of uses in residential areas. And what will that do? It will empower towns to start taking these bad uses and getting them out of residential neighborhoods where they never should have been in the first place, but they were, for whatever reason, allowed to enter there. That process will take several years, but what it will also do is to help Black and Latino homeowners in our central cities create wealth by reducing nuisances and blight around their homes, which is a significant source of property reductions. So those are a couple of examples of the way that zoning codes lock in bad outcomes, even in places that we think are open, and welcoming to Black and Latino families like our cities. We even see that there are deficiencies in those zoning codes that we can remedy through thoughtful and smart zoning reform. So I encourage folks to go to our website to sign up for our mailing list if you're interested in zoning specifically. As an architect, you should be. It's something that dictates everything that you build and everything that you do. And so we'd love to hear from you and get your involvement. But I thought I would just make sure that we don't just talk about form-based codes, because there's so many other ways that zoning can help equalize, level the playing field for our community.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Is there anything else you would like to add before we jump back into the questions and before you have to sign off?
No, I would just say, that as architects, it's great for you to be involved. It's great for you to be participating in this conversation. And I think the more architects that are involved in public service and public life, the better, because architects bring a special set of values and a special set of skills to the table that non-architects don't always have, because architects are able to articulate what is important about space. They're able to understand how people use space. And, stepping back, even as architects, you took planning classes. You have the ability to see the nuts and bolts and the big picture. And I find that too many architects shy away from public service and public life. And I think, all of us are super overloaded with COVID right now. You should take opportunities where you can and where you have time to participate in civic life. It would really mean a lot for your communities. And it's especially important for minority architects to step up, because we're always an underrepresented voice in a profession where we're already totally underrepresented, and female minority architects most of all, as you know. So I think, I'm grateful for the chance to talk with you guys, and hopefully folks will stay in touch. I'll put my email address in the chat as well. So thank you.
I actually wanted to be complimentary of Ms. Broden, because she's an advocate for, not only as a Latina woman, but she's an advocate for a field, as you just already mentioned, is really underrepresented by minorities. So, I appreciate the work and the advocacy that you've been doing. And that's why I'm a strong supporter of NHS and gentlemen like Kevin Taylor, because it's people that look different in a field where it can greatly impact the lives of people of communities of color. So thank you for your advocacy and your work.
Thank you for the opportunity to present it to smart legislators like yourself.
That's actually a great segue into one of our questions, which is, how do you recommend that organizations such as NOMA and architects specifically get involved and help with policy and reforms? How can architects make an impact? I guess we could, are you speaking, Representative Reyes? I think you might have to unmute your phone.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question? I didn't hear the whole question because it wasn't that loud in my car.
Sure. What I asked was, how do you recommend organizations such as NOMA and also architects can get involved in policymaking and pushing through reforms?
The best and easiest way for anybody to get involved is to actually come up to the Capitol, come up to the LOB, and actually advocate, help us actually put through good legislation to help, if you will, the architectural outlay of what the rest of this state can look like. We know that Connecticut is one of the most segregated states. We know this. So any help that we can get in helping us craft language and or bills to help make it more of a cross-pollination, if you will, of people. Any way that you can advocate coming up to the legislature to actually advocate, testify, and then put in letters of support. And there are many desegregation champions up in the chamber that we have, as we call, our own in-house experts and people that have been working with this for a long time. And we're fortunate right now to have the Representative Brandon McGee, which is the former chair of the BPRC, is again the housing chair, and he's a staunch fighter for the underdog and for the underrepresented. So I would advocate that anybody who is interested in working with Representative McGee, the Housing Committee, and anybody up at the legislature is to write the letters, come and testify. It's a little different now because of Zoom, but it will open up again hopefully very soon, because there's nothing more impactful than actually testifying in the person, in actually doing it in person. But please advocate for these underrepresented communities. As a legislator, I have had my eyes open as to how did we get here to begin with? And it was simply because we were never at the table. And this is how we got to where we are. So that said, the Black and Puerto Rican Caucus has now 32 members, many of them in leadership position. So we probably are at the strongest point we've ever been. And sure that if we're given a bigger microphone and we're at that table, that we are actually doing the people's work properly and accurately. So please come and advocate, and do not be afraid or hesitate to reach out to your representatives and your state senators to do the right thing for communities of color.
If I may, Diana, add on to that. I think that, Representative Reyes is absolutely right. I hear from a number of state reps, from reps of color that, well, I'm elected, but then once I'm in the Capitol, I don't hear anymore from my community. A lot of people say, well, we elected you as representatives, so we want you to do the right thing. But but because they're representatives doesn't mean that they know anything about architecture and or anything about any other areas. They need our guidance as to what is helpful and what's not helpful to our community, particularly in areas like zoning or other areas of architecture. It's really important that we make our cities and our communities livable. And from a health perspective, that means that they're walkable, that they're safe, and that there are things that reduce pollution and reduce and then also I'm also working with the Governor's Council on climate change. And we know that our communities are more vulnerable to the effects of climate change, to both the increase in air pollution from the increase in heat, the allergies, and that we are less likely to survive hurricanes and other types of events. The people who die of heat-related illness tend to be urban shut-ins, elderly shut-ins. So we need to make the cities and our plans, we need to make our plans so that we can protect communities of color from these things that we are expecting to see more of as we get climate change, from the hurricanes, from the flooding. We're seeing much more intense rain. We're expecting more rain, more flooding, and that's urban flooding as well as the coastal flooding. So we need to build our cities to be more resistant to that. Me personally, for example, I live in a condominium, and in July we had 2.5 inches of rain in an hour, and it caused more than $60,000 worth of flooding in 5 of our units. But we need to be able to anticipate that and change our systems and install green systems like the bioswales and other things that can reduce the immediate flooding. And we need you to be testifying that this is what we need and that this is how the state should be investing to make the cities more adapted to adapt the city for climate change. So there are many things that you can do. And as Representative Reyes says, testifying in front of the state legislature or the city council, speaking to your own state reps or city council members, and letting them know about your interest and about your expertise. All of those are important. And you have a unique perspective as architects of color that would be very valuable in the policy making.
Okay, thank you for that. I think it'd be interesting in the future to see how many of the architects that are joined in on this call will take the initiative and reach out to their state legislators and potentially see ways to get involved. Speaking of getting involved, so in the interest of time, I will make this our last question so that there's time for a Q&A with the audience. But when you're looking to make a change or introduce new policies and regulations, how do you go about outreach? I know for you, Dr. Mitchell, you said you do a lot of grassroots, and I know for Representative Reyes, I'm sure he also has experience as a representative dealing with movements from a grassroots level, but also from a grass tops level. So I was wondering, Dr. Mitchell, if you could just start off and talk about the experience you've had with success of getting grassroots movements off the ground to actually implement change.
Sorry. So one of the things that I'm actually trying to do with the Governor's Council on Climate Change, where I'm part of the Equity and Environmental Justice Subcommittee. We've made our first year report, and then we will continue to the end of this year. But one of the things I want to do is to make sure that there's funding for communities, particularly communities of color, to be part of the development of plans. So I want to make sure that there's funding for organizations that can do grassroots organizing in our communities all around the state. From my perspective, if there's any town of 100,000 or more, they certainly have an environmental justice problem, whether they know it or not. But there are even smaller towns that have pockets of low-income neighborhoods where those people need to be heard. They need to make sure that the plans include them. So what I do is to try to contact you talked about grass tops, neighborhood leaders, and find out, and try to find, if I have an idea of what I want to see, I will talk with neighborhood leaders and say, can I come? When is your next meeting? Can I come and get 10 minutes on the agenda and talk about X or Y? And like I said, at the state level, oftentimes, the state legislature is divided into committees. And so go to the committee staff of the committee that you're interested in. If it's in housing, or if it's in, if it's financing, or whether it's zoning, planning and zoning, and talk to them and tell them your ideas, and then again ask them about other organizations that are working in this area, or if you have your own contacts with organizational leaders, find out who's interested in your area, and talk to them and about your ideas, or about how you can have an impact. Even if you can't make all of the meetings, there are certain key ones where you might be able to come and testify, or even write a letter saying that this is something that's really important, and it's important to communities of color because of X, Y, and Z, and that there are new architectural ideas that are coming around that would probably be helpful in Connecticut. So things like, passive house. From my perspective, public housing should have much stronger standards than other housing, because people in public housing don't have the option of moving if their health is affected by air pollution, for example, or the off-gassing of paint. They don't have the option of peeling down the paint and replacing the walls, or of moving. So public housing needs to have much stronger standards than than others, and you are in the best position to say that, to say that because of the vulnerability of people living in public housing, the standards need to be higher than they do for just about any other type of building, if that's what you think. So just talking to people like Representative Reyes, who would be who would know that from his experience and would want you want to be able to project your voice and be able to say, I talked to NOMA, and this is what they say and what they recommend as the experts in this field. And this is consistent with what I know. And I can tell you that, that you can, we can get Paulo Campos here to speak on this issue, for example. So those are things that are really, really important to get policy passed, is to be present, to let people know what you're thinking, what you're recommending, to write letters of support, and to and to build coalitions, to be part of coalitions around the kinds of things that you support.
Representative Reyes, were you about to jump in?
No, I'm sorry, I was listening in and I was leaning in to do something here as I want to pull over a little bit. I wanted to pull over and continue talking.
Okay. So as Dr. Mitchell stated, building coalitions and reaching out to your legislators, obviously a critical step in enacting policy. And so as a legislator, I wanted to ask you, during your time in office, what is one of the most effective ways to get your attention? And, what are the coalitions that are successful? What are some of the strategies that you've seen when they do approach the legislature with their proposals?
The most effective advocators are the ones that come in person and give the personal testification and give their personal testimonies right to the Environment Committee. I have found the Environmental Committee to be one that listens very intently, very carefully. And as I said, I went to Hartford with an open mind on the environmental issues. I am not an environmentalist. I'm an engineer, but not an environmental engineer. And I went there with an open mind on what can I do? How can I make a difference? What can I do different to try to help and advocate for communities of color that are usually the dumping grounds for all things that nobody wants in their neighborhood. And the best examples are what I found up there is that the best examples for success are absolutely working with coalitions. There are many people who are experts in these fields, no matter what the topic is, and they will not only testify with you, they will also testify for you on your behalf, and they will also help you bring your testimony to the right audience. So I was pleasantly surprised at the number of coalitions and support groups that I had, representing a community of color. I thought that, oh boy, here we go again, another uphill battle by yourself. But that wasn't the case at all in Hartford. And there are many coalitions and well-informed and well-prepared to do battle to help underrepresented communities, because the solution is very simple. You're not only fighting for those that are underserved, because there's only one earth, and if you ruin it for one, you ruin it for all. So, and we have had many people join the coalition to help me advocate for a better water area, a better Connecticut, and a better country.
So let me tell you some secrets that Representative Reyes would not be able to tell you, and about how to get things passed. The first thing is that persistence is really important. That you need to educate elected officials, and you need to be persistent. It's seldom that a law gets passed in its first year that it's proposed. You need to educate a lot of people. Also, particularly on the local level, you can hold your elected officials accountable, but on the local and the state level. The one thing that elected officials want more than anything else, except Representative Reyes, is to be reelected no matter what. And the question is, how are people reelected? People are reelected because people know their names. Most people have no idea what their elected officials do for them. And all they know is their name, and they see a familiar name on the ballot, and so they will vote for them. But what you can do is to let your colleagues and the constituents of the elected officials, let them know what the elected officials are doing. Whether if they're doing good things, let them know that they're doing really good things in your area. If they're doing bad things, let them know that they're doing bad things in your area. We found in the Connecticut Coalition for Environmental Justice that we were able to sway elections in Hartford and in New Haven, even though that wasn't our intent. But by just educating, by grassroots education, and having people to talk to other people about what their elected officials are doing or are not doing. So that's a power that that you have. People are concerned that big corporations have a lot of influence, and that's true. But you also have influence, particularly in communities of color. Another not so secret is that that not as many people vote in our communities, so that those who do vote do carry more weight and are more influential. So so let people know what you what you support, who you want, which elected officials you want to support it, and whether they do support it or whether they don't support it. All of those things are important to getting policies passed, and letting the public know, writing letters to the editor, writing op-eds, proposing legislation. The legislature doesn't have a lot of staff. We're a part-time legislature. They don't have a lot of staff. So drafts of proposed language for legislation at the city level or at the state level is oftentimes helpful. So those are some of the things, some of the things that you can do to have more influence. I don't know whether Representative Reyes agrees with that.
Absolutely. Like I said, nothing like firsthand, in-person presentations and testimony. You raise an excellent point. I have seen very few things pass in the first year. Persistence is the key for almost every piece of legislation that comes out of Hartford. I put my emails out there. I have a web page, Facebook page, LinkedIn account. I have many ways of communication. I have 4 different emails, so I make myself accessible. And I understand what you're saying about reaching out to actually communicate with your representatives. Many representatives are not as accessible and get elected and really don't participate in the process the way I believe that we're intended to be. We're elected to represent people, so we have to be with our people and then go up to Hartford and advocate for our people. That is not the case with every representative or every senator that is elected. That said, if you don't hold them accountable and they get reelected, that's not shame on them. That's shame on you. So I look at it like this. I have a purpose. I go to Hartford with a purpose. I get elected to complete that purpose. And then if I do a good job, I'm awarded with 2 more years. Otherwise, then somebody else has to step up and do the job. But I do like the term that those that are given the opportunity and given the power should also be held accountable. And you know, there is a lot of truth to the squeaky wheel gets the oil.
Well said. Thank you both for your time, and I think it's important for us to remember, as you stated,
You're on mute now.
so much. So I just wanted to say, you guys, thank you, both of you, and that well said, that we should remember to exercise our voice, and that we have a great gift here of democracy, and that we have power in numbers. And so with that, I'd like to hand it back over to NOMA, over to Max, so that he could ask any questions that we might have for the audience, and then close this out.
Thank you, Diana. So at this point, I want to thank ahead again our panelists and moderator, Diana, also our sponsors and event organizers. And before we close out, if you guys have any questions, you're welcome to add them to the chat. I know we had a couple of them and they were directed to Sarah. So if you have any other ones, feel free to add them. So I'll give you a couple more minutes. In the meantime, we have a couple more minutes. I would say I do have a question of my own. Dr. Mitchell, you said you are with the GC3. So I wanted to ask you, I know we discussed a lot about redlining and zoning regulations, but have you seen perhaps I don't know if building codes or other state laws have affected low-income communities? Is there, other than just zoning, being architects, how can we impact, change?
Right. Again, I think that from a climate perspective, you are in a good position to say how we can build to be resilient. I know that in Florida, for example, when they changed the building codes for hurricanes, they had a lot less damage from the hurricanes in the areas where they changed the building codes. And the same thing with the codes for electrical infrastructure. So I think that it would be helpful for those of you who are looking at that to describe that. And I have a question for you. I mean, do you have a legislative agenda? Do you have policies that you as an organization want to support? Obviously, you can act as individuals, but you will be much stronger if you act as an organization. And talk through with each other what kinds of policies you can support, and find out from other organizations like Save the Sound. Puts together an annual meeting, and also the Legal Conservation Voters puts together an agenda of bills and laws that they think are likely to pass, or likely to, more likely to get heard. And it would be helpful, I think, if organizations like yours would go through that and say, oh, we're interested in this one, we're interested in that one. And so we can support this, we can support that, or let's find out about this one, maybe it needs to be changed a little, maybe we have some ideas on that. So I would advise you to go to somebody like the League of Conservation Voters and see the list of bills that they anticipate that might be enacted this year in the state legislature, and find out find out who is advocating those bills, and and whether there might be some that that you could support in there.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that, Dr. Mitchell. And that's exactly the reason why we are having this panel discussion. We as NOMA Connecticut are a new organization, and we're looking at you as experts, you, Sarah, and Representative Reyes. You've been working, you've been in the foreground, so we want to be able to help you. So I think this has been great, very fruitful, and we hope to stay in contact. Again, I thank you all, the panelists and moderator and event organizers. We have these panel discussion recorded, so if anybody wanted to add anything else or wants to see the video, please contact us at NOMA Connecticut. You can have our contact information at nomaconnecticut.org. If I don't see any other questions in the chat box, so I think at this point, unless anybody else has anything else to add, again, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you all for your insight. Just like Omar says, Waterbury resident here too would love to see this city improve. For Waterbury, Martin finishing, thank you for the informative panel. So thank you all for attending too. Thank you to all of the attendees. With that, I adjourn the meeting. Thank you very much. Have a good day. Enjoy this now.
Thank you.